Hi, this is Navina Shine. Here I am sitting in my little experimental space here, and this is day 14 of the experiment. 2 weeks have gone by. I'm still fine, healthy, I exercise. I'm probably more healthier than I was before. Lost about 16 or 17 pounds in weight, which mostly came from the belly, which is a good thing. So, not much to talk about, there's not much going on. In one room, there's not a lot to do. So I thought I would read you the first chapter of my second book, which is called One Girl Alone, a Bold, Adventurous Traveller. Let me show them to you. Ooh, there you go. One Girl Alone, a Bold, Adventurous Traveller. When I was 21, 1970, I decided I was going to hitchhike around the world. I've talked about that in one of the other YouTubes. I'm not really familiar with the modern way of doing things. But I thought I'd read you the first chapter of the story and see if you're interested in it. You can go to Amazon to get them, or ebook stand if you want the hard copy. Okay, so chapter 1, One Girl Alone, a Bold, Adventurous Traveller by Navina Shine. One girl alone? Don't be so stupid. You'll get killed, raped, injured. We'll never see you again. What will happen if? What will you do if? But I never bothered about such considerations. The ifs of life seemed to be of concern only to the minds of those who were afraid. I wasn't afraid. I rarely felt fear, unless when danger was staring me in the face, and in this instance, wasn't. I'd hitchhiked before all over England, always on my own, and I never had any trouble. I loved it. I had suddenly found out that other people did not exist in the same world that I lived in. Their experiences and thoughts were sometimes totally different from mine, and they were right in theirs too. How could that possibly be? A whole new vision had opened up, and I was all set to explore pastures new, deserts new, highways new, anything, anywhere. I worked hard for a whole year and saved up the princely sum of $150. Even in 1970, it was not a vast amount to embark on a round-the-world trip with. But me, being an incurable optimist, I didn't worry about the minor details of life. I set off with my small, lightweight backpack on my shoulders, complete with lightweight sleeping bag, smart dress, worn-out cords, raincoat, and a change of clothing. I arrived at Ostend clutching my passport and map in my hand, with my money safely stowed inside my bra. The mist was whirling all around, and I could barely see the road. I had rarely encountered 5 in the morning. It was quite an experience to watch the ghostly illumination of the blackness. I saw the darkness gradually disappear as the sun broke through the cocoon and emerged into the presence of a brand new August day. The whole of life was before me, complete, exciting, and unknown. I got up from the side of the road where I'd been resting. Being a lazy hitchhiker as opposed to a healthy walker, I had collapsed at the exertion of carrying my pack to a suitable distance from the Dover-Ostend ferry. Standing at the curb, I stuck out my thumb. My first ride stopped. It was a magic moment. This was the culmination of all my energies over the past 2 years. what I planned for, saved for, dreamed about, and deliberated over, was finally enacting itself before my very eyes. In a euphoric haze, I ensconced myself in the front of a small van and beamed a bonjour to my very first driver. It was then that it filtered through my heaven-turned senses an aroma that was none on earth or in heaven. Turning around, I gazed straight down the snout of the most enormously fat pig I had ever seen. The poor driver must have thought that he'd picked up someone from a lunatic asylum, for here was a female with long flowing hair, couldn't speak a word of Flemish, collapsed in paroxysms of mirth over the sight of a simple pig. I think he was very pleased to drop me off at the turn of the road and go on his normal sensible way, probably swearing that he would never pick up another hitchhiker again. It was my intention to pass through Europe quickly and move on to the more exotic eastern parts. So 600 miles on the first day was not bad going. That night, Horst, my last ride, deposited me at the youth hostel in Nuremberg. The youth hostel system is an international organization which maintains cheap sleeping places for travelers all around the world. They have a multitude of facilities to delight the weary. These include warm bunk, beds, dryer and washers, self-catering kitchens, catered food, TV and games room. People can enjoy an evening out on the town or stay inside and swap tales with congenial company drawn from all corners of the earth. The morning chore is not too arduous, and everyone is happily on their way by 10:30 a.m. The hostel in Nuremberg is housed in a magnificent old castle overlooking the city, and Horst took me on a small tour of the area. We drank beer and ate a strange concoction of sausage, cabbage and hot sauce served in the heart-shaped dish, which I was told was a speciality of the region. I dropped into bed at 10 o'clock that night and slept as if there was never going to be a tomorrow. One of the beauties of having no particular place to get to is that you can go anywhere you like. So when these two guys said they were going to an army base close to Berlin and would I like to come for the ride, I decided that Munich could wait till later. From the stories I'd heard, I was expecting to see the place littered with barbed wire, machine guns, guards in their turrets, and all sorts of warlike paraphernalia. Unfortunately, the army camp was 80 kilometers from the border and was reminiscent of a sleepy US Midwest village, even down to the Coca-Cola we drank. The guys later dropped me off safely on the Salzburg Autobahn. It's strange, but when you do a lot of hitchhiking, you get to develop a sixth sense about people and about danger. Being very trusting, I have heard the term stupid to describe this state. I always assume that everyone is okay, and it takes me a long time to catch on to the feelings that things are not quite right. But that feeling was vaguely with me when this German man picked me up. I didn't speak German, and he didn't speak English or French, so you can imagine that the communication was somewhat banal. But lots of smiles and gesticulations made up for all the gaps, and our ride was fairly amicable. On this particular day, my second of the journey, the weather chose to show the world what it could really do when it was aroused. It proceeded with spectacular flashes of lightning that ripped through the skies, and roars of thunder that would have outclashed the Berlin Symphony Orchestra, to lash down on us mere mortals beneath. It turned our world into a raging, bubbling quagmire. I like storms, and enjoyed sipping my coffee and eating my strawberry fran and fresh cream to the sound of hell outside. All traffic had stopped, and there were radio reports of lines 6 miles long on the autobahn. I wasn't particularly perturbed when we turned off the road and began to follow a parallel course on minor roads to get out of the deluged area. I could still see Salzburg on the signs by the light of their headlights. Mind you, it was getting late, and I realized that we wouldn't make Salzburg in time for me to check into the youth hostel. I then decided that a night in the forest would be quite an adventure. When I explained my intentions, using appropriate hand signals, my driver was shocked and horrified at the idea. His answer, using appropriate hand signals, suggested that he had a house, a room and a key, and I should be better off spending the night there. I was tempted, but something on the edge of my consciousness prompted me not to trust him. In my best German, I shouted, "Halt!" and he stopped, more out of shock than anything else. I clambered out, dragging my luggage behind me, dankeschöned him very much, and walked smartly off towards the trees. By this time, he realized what I was doing, jumped out of the car and came racing after me, volubly trying to persuade me that everything would be all right and I would be quite safe. Apart from the fact that I was quite taken to the idea of sleeping in the forest, I was definitely getting bad vibes about him. I dankeschöned him again and walked off even more smartly. After a moment, he walked back to his car. I heaved a sigh of relief and watched him drive up the road. Imagine my horror when I saw him turn his car in through a gap in the hedge and come back towards me. Not being totally careless of my safety, I took out my pepper pot, ready to throw the substance into the rogue's eyes should he attack me. I raced off to the shadows of the trees, crouched behind an incumbent bush, and, with an effort of sheer will, tried to control my rapid breathing and trembling limbs. It took me quite some time to realize that the lights I could see were coming from the cars on the road, that he must have turned the car around and driven off a while ago. I thankfully moved further into the forest, sorted my sheet of plastic and sleeping bag out, and passed a pleasant, though rather uncomfortable night under the stars. During all this excitement, I had kept to the forefront of my mind that the poor guy was probably only concerned for my safety and was not really going to harm me. It was only the next day, when I got back on the road again, that I discovered that we had been going around in a big circle and were almost back in Munich again. From that moment, I knew I was going to be all right on this trip. Something was looking after me. My intuition, a preservation instinct, or maybe the devil looks after his own is more than just an old saying. What could have been better when I finally did reach Salzburg than to be shown around by a music student? He had given me a ride, and we ate Wiener Schnitzel in the shadow of the great opera house. Unfortunately, the festival had finished, so we just spent the time imbibing the holiday atmosphere that prevailed in the town, and I moved on next day towards the east. Hitchhiking is a most fascinating way of travelling. If you can communicate, you can gain a wealth of insight into the being of the driver. After you've established where he's going, where you are going, and where you are going to be dropped off, you talk about the weather for a while. Then the next part of the conversation is almost invariably, isn't it dangerous for a girl to hitchhike on her own? I sort of agree with this, but I tend to take the view that there are very few people who are out there to get you. Most people are quite normal, and if you make them feel that you trust them implicitly, then they are at pains to show that they are trustworthy. So many people have gone out of their way, miles out, to make sure that I was in the right place for the next ride. I've been given countless cups of coffee and meals, especially by truck drivers, and many people have offered me shelter for the night. It would be easy to become so used to it that you begin to expect it and really start bumming off people and being a parasite. But it's never like that. Each encounter has been a gift and a new experience, and their generosity has come out of caring and concern. However, there are times when this is not so. When I sense this, I steer the conversation around to their wives and children and their feelings for them. Unfair tactics, really, but it usually works. Many interesting things come out of such conversations. It seems that when somebody knows that they will never see you again and that you will have no connection with their lives, they are able to pour out the whole of themselves and will tell you things that they would never dream of telling anybody else, especially their wives. I'm a great listener, and it's usually what they need. For me, it's of tremendous value just to hear them talk, because what they are saying is new for me too. A convent education is not really conducive to broad-mindedness. Mind you, there are occasions when even I feel the stupidity of hitchhiking. And this is how I came to the last thumbing session of my travels. It was near Graz, on the Austrian-Yugoslavian border, that this truck stopped. I jumped in and saw that there were two drivers. I quickly discovered that they were Iranian. My red warning lights were on, and decided that I was going to play it cool and remove myself from the situation as soon as possible. Ahmed and Mahmoud didn't speak much English, but after a few conversational sallies, I could see they were not morons. Such was my suspicion and ignorance of other cultures. Having been brought up to be very polite and not hurt people's feelings, it was impossible for me, with a limited vocabulary, to find an excuse to leave them when we had to wait for 3 hours at the Yugoslavian border post for the truck to be cleared. I could only fume and wait. It was rather fortuitous, really, as the days spent with them were to be extremely interesting. Ahmed was the kingpin of the enterprise. He was around 40 years old, owned 2 trucks, and did the run between Tehran and Germany every few weeks. 15 years earlier, he had spent 1 year in prison for having written a book or pamphlet which the Shah had considered seditious. He spoke about 6 languages, insisting on telling me each word in all 6 languages. This served to confuse me further and I'd remember none. He had a lively sense of humour, and there was a lot of laughter around him. It seemed that he fell madly in love with me, but that was something I discovered later. He had friends everywhere, and was very involved with the Iranian truck driving fraternity, which is a way of life on its own. Just after the Yugoslavian-Bulgarian border, we met a man on the roadside who had broken down, and Ahmed went miles out of his way, up and down country roads full of ox carts, pedestrians, and mad drivers, towing this stranger to his house. When we arrived, the man gave us breakfast, and since Ahmed would accept no money, he gave us each a bottle of cognac, some biscuits, and a tin of caviar. Ahmed definitely impressed me. On arriving in Sofia, we parked the truck and headed for the nearest public baths. This was my first experience of a Turkish bath, and after several days on the road, I was in high need of its services. It was all done out in marble. The towels were enormous, and I revelled in its luxury. Later we went sightseeing around the city and saw the tomb of Dmitri, done again in marble. My impression of Sofia is that it was a very clean city, with people washing the streets and pavements every night with hosepipes. The people I met ate well too, and that was my first introduction to Eastern types of food, which featured salad with most meals. We changed some money on the black market, and that's how I ended up 6 days out of England with more money than I had started off with.